The hope is that one day modern technology can somehow solve this nearly 60-year-old mystery. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Beverly Jarosz. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you're new to the channel, I tell multiple true crime stories every single week here on YouTube, so please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. You can also see some short form true crime stories from me over on TikTok. I have a couple different pages. The links to those are in the link tree in the description of this video below. The links to my TikTok will also pop up here at some point in the beginning and at the end. Check it out if you want to. Also in the link tree, you will find my link for the merch store. I sell t-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that. We do ship all over the entire world, so feel free to check it out. And then lastly, if there's a case you want me to cover, just send me a really quick email listed below, and just send me the name of the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to my list. I have over 6,000 names on that list. I pick my cases that I cover at random. I will get to that case eventually. I just cannot promise you when. But let's get into today's case. Beverly Jarosz was born on October 1st, 1948 in Garfield Heights, Ohio. At the time of this case, Beverly is 16 years old. She is the older of two children in the family. She also has a 12-year-old sister named Carol. Beverly was a junior at Marymount High School, and at the time, both Beverly and Carol were on Christmas vacation. It was December 28th, 1964. Early that morning, both of their parents would leave for work, and then some point in the early morning, early afternoon, Beverly and Carol would walk the short distance down the road to their grandmother's house. Sometime around 1 p.m., Beverly told her grandma that she needed to go back to her home because she was supposed to be meeting a couple of friends. So the grandma ends up giving Beverly a ride back to the house. According to Beverly's mom, when Beverly got back to the house, she called her mom while her mom was at work just to say, hey, I'm back at the house now. This is what's going on. Now, supposedly at the same time or right after the phone call with her mom, Beverly gets a phone call from a man who is asking for her father. This man identified himself as Steven Stankiewicz, and Beverly had written down that information on a piece of paper. She told him that her father wasn't home, but that he would be home later, and so the guy says he would call back. By the way, he never did. Beverly then calls her grandma after the grandma arrives back at home and says, just to let you know, my friend Barbara is coming over. Barbara was a neighbor of hers. At 1:25 p.m., according to Barbara, Barbara gets to the house and she knocks on the Jarosz front door. When she did this, she can hear a very loud and very distinct thump coming from somewhere upstairs in the Jarosz home. To her, it sounded like someone was moving some heavy furniture around. Barbara knocks on the door again, and she gets no answer. She kind of calls out for Beverly's name. She gets no response. Barbara thinks, okay, maybe she's canceling to hang out. That's fine. And so she just walks back to her home. So Barbara calls her friend Margie because the three of them, Margie, Barbara, and Beverly, were supposed to be hanging out that afternoon. When Barbara gets back to the house, her home, she calls Margie and says, hey, I don't know what's going on, but Beverly didn't answer the door. So Margie, who has Beverly's grandma's phone number, calls the grandma to say, hey, she didn't answer the door. What's going on? Do you know? So the grandma calls the father, Thaddeus Jarosz, who is at work. He picks up and leaves work immediately because he feels something is wrong. Now, I forgot to mention this, but when Barbara was at the house knocking on the door, she thought she also heard the sound of the radio inside the house blaring. When Thaddeus gets to the house, as he's walking up to it, he also hears the sound of a very loud radio blaring from inside the home. Thaddeus opens the door, and he doesn't see anything immediately wrong in the house. He opens up Beverly's bedroom door, and he sees what no parent should ever have to see. Beverly was lying face down on her bed, or I'm not sure if it was halfway on her bed, but she was partially on the bed. She had been tied up with rope, and there was blood everywhere. There was also indications that she had something wrapped around her throat, and she was very clearly deceased. The coroner, once they had the body, determined that she had been strangled, but she was also stabbed 40 times. She was brutalized inside this room. And Beverly fought back because she had defensive wounds on her, indicating she was trying to stop this person. But eventually that person, whoever it is, won and managed to tie her up. There was no sign of a sexual assault, and nothing appeared to have been stolen from the home. And by all accounts, it sounds like when Barbara knocked on that door and she heard the sound of furniture moving around, she heard the murder happening. She was likely listening to Beverly being killed. At the house, there was not a ton of evidence. This is also 1964. They didn't have DNA technology back then. They did have fingerprinting. I think they may have dusted for prints, but it doesn't sound like they actually got any usable prints. This is obviously before any kind of modern technology, so you don't have any GPS or cell phones or anything like that. Back then, it was just old school gumshoeing, basically. They did find the note that Beverly had written down about this man calling, this Steven Stankiewicz, and the father said, I don't know anyone by that name. And it turns out that's not even anyone's name that they could find. Like, they couldn't find anyone by that name. And it appeared to just be a fake name given to Beverly. Is it possible that this person called the house just to see if anyone was home? And Beverly said, well, basically it's just me. You know, dad's not here, mom's not here. And maybe that's what happened. They also discovered that Beverly supposedly had an unknown stalker. She had been given or gifted a bracelet and a ring recently, but she had no idea who they were from. She also got many phone calls asking for her, but then when she picked up the phone, the person hung up. They did question some teenage boys, or a teenage boy at least, in the area, in the Garfield Heights area. They brought him in for questioning and they kind of grilled him, but they really couldn't come up with anything to tie him to it. And it sounded like it was just more of like a crapshoot. They're just questioning anyone, basically. They also discovered that Beverly would go to the Cleveland Museum of Art pretty frequently, and there was a recent occurrence where she had been there shortly before the murder, where a security guard would later tell police after the murder happened that because he recognized Beverly because she was always there. There was a situation where an unknown man seemed to be following Beverly around the museum, almost stalking her. She wasn't aware of his presence. He was a tall, thin man, and the guard said he looked angry. Police have never been able to find whoever that man is. They have never been able to find out who exactly that man was that called the house, who gave a fake name. They have never found out if there in fact was a stalker who was stalking Beverly, and who that person is, they don't know. They unfortunately have just never gotten any solid breaks in this case. They've gotten tips and they've gotten, suggestions from people, and that's how they've kind of questioned a couple of men from time to time, especially a couple of teenagers, but all of that led to nothing. They were never able to positively link anyone to this murder. And it's kind of like, also, what was the motive? What was the reason? Because if you're not going to steal anything, there was no forced entry in the home. This really appeared to be a specific attack against Beverly. But why? And without them sexually assaulting her, their goal was to just murder her. She was a 16-year-old high school girl. And she was so brutalized, stabbed a little over 40 times and then strangled. That's a personal attack. And so oftentimes this type of attack is done by someone that the victim knows, and that is a possibility here. But the thing is they just don't know who that person is, and they've never been able to find them. It has almost been 60 years since the murder of 16-year-old Beverly Jarosz, and they have nothing. They have been recently hoping against all hope, that with modern technology the way it is now, that they could take any and all of the evidence they collected from the crime scene and just hope that it was stored properly and test it and swab it and try to see if they can get any DNA from it. And if they can get DNA, they can do the genealogical DNA testing to create a profile of the guy, or see if the person's family member had ever put their own DNA into the ancestral websites. And they're just hoping that's what that works. But they are still currently working on that process. And so far in 2024, there are no updates. Beverly's father, Thaddeus, died in 2012, and her mother, Eleanor, died in 2018. Both of them held out as long as they possibly could to see this killer come to justice, but sadly, they never got to see it. Her sister is still alive, and other family members are still alive, and so there are plenty of people who can still see that justice come to fruition. It is difficult. It is difficult, especially with cases this old. You know, you have to cling on to hope, but at the same time, sometimes it's really difficult to pull any kind of physical evidence from a case this old, especially back when they didn't really know about or think about storing evidence properly, which is not their fault. No one knew back then. They didn't know what we would be capable of, obviously, now. But hopefully, somehow they can get something and they can find a way to catch this killer. The killer would likely be, at this point, probably at least in their 80s. Maybe in their 70s, depending, And there is a good chance that person may be deceased, but there's also a chance they may still be alive. Somebody somewhere out there knows who killed Beverly Jarosz. The killer may have talked, may have spilled the beans to someone. Maybe they got drunk one night and just said, I did it. And maybe that person out there is you. Maybe you know the killer, and you know the killer is dead, or the killer is still alive, and you know that. You can call and report any information you have anonymously. You don't have to say who you are. All you have to say is what you know. And Beverly Jarosz and her family deserve that. They deserve answers. And so, if you have any information about the murder of Beverly Jarosz in 1964, please contact the Garfield Heights, Ohio Police Department at 216-475-5686. Please, if you know anything that can help, please call. Please help Beverly Jarosz get the justice she rightfully deserves.